Have you ever had a paranormal experience? Who would you call to help you understand it? Dan Aykroyd? If you live in New England, you might instead call the afterlife investigators the focus of this week's show. My name is Walker, and this is the Recap episode, a podcast where I use social science to research, review, recap, and realize new things about reality TV, covering shows that are all-time favorites and shows that you've never heard of. This week, I'm talking about Season 1 of Ghost Hunters, a documentary soap-style show that follows the paranormal investigation work of TAPS, the Atlantic Paranormal Society. Before I get into talking about TAPS and the show itself, I just want to take a moment to kind of recognize that, I love this show. This show means so much to me. It's one that I've been excited to talk about ever since I kind of came up with the idea for this podcast. I used to watch this show regularly with my family when I was growing up. Wednesday night, was Ghost Hunters night. We watched a lot of Sci-Fi Channel, and for some reason this show, among many others on there, just enraptured me. And I've watched it all throughout the years. It's something that I can always come back to and enjoy, kind of a comfort show in that regard. And currently during this block of spooky month, Halloween, autumnal vibe shows that I'm covering, Ghost Hunters was the first one that came to mind. So I'm very excited to talk about this one. So TAPS, the Atlantic Paranormal Society, is a paranormal investigation organization founded by Jason Hawes and Grant Wilson, who are our two main guys at the center of this show. There's quite a bit of information on Wikipedia about TAPS. Of course, they also have their own website, and they've been doing this stuff for a while, so you can find a lot of information about the organization and the work they've done and continue to do. In 1990, Jason Hawes began what was called the Rhode Island Paranormal Society, RIPS, after he had a personal experience with some spirits, something that was unexplainable. After RIPS began investigating cases throughout the New England area, Jason teamed up with Grant Wilson in 1995, and that's when they officially formed TAPS, as it's now known. Wilson also had personal experiences with stuff that was unexplainable and had drawn him to this kind of paranormal investigation. The group was originally run out of Jason's basement, and at the time really only consisted of those two. Because they've been working in this field for quite a while, they've really pioneered a lot of the investigative techniques that many other paranormal investigators would use. And then in 2003, they were approached by Pilgrim Films, also called Pilgrim Media Group, and taped the 10 episodes of this first season of Ghost Hunters. In my research, I did find an interview that Jason Hawes did for a podcast. So, from the Creaking Door Paranormal Radio podcast, he talked with their hosts a bit about how the show actually spawned and came about. He said he'd been asked to do some TV before, but initially it was a New York Times article which featured the TAPS team, Jason and Grant, talking about how they debunked what was alleged to be a haunting that led to even further TV outreach. And they had kind of denied it, they didn't really want to do it, but finally one producer said the magic words to Jason. He said, "Hey, I just want to send cameras with you, regardless of whether you end up catching anything." And furthermore, to kind of convince Jason to do it, he argued that if Jason and Grant didn't do this kind of show, someone else will, eventually. And then they'll be the ones representing the paranormal investigators field. And Jason's a man very much about professionalism and reputation, so that was exactly the words that needed to be said to him to convince him to do this. Jason said they did 10 episodes, they thought it wouldn't last, but then it took the Sci-Fi Channel to the number one slot on Wednesday primetime for cable shows. So, and it's had many seasons and spin-offs, so clearly very successful. I will link to that episode of their podcast in my notes and description and on Spotify. Definitely check it out, and check out the Creaking Door Paranormal Radio podcast as well. It's a very fun one. So I mentioned the show was made by the Pilgrim Media Group, which was founded in 1997. They're best known for producing reality shows for the Discovery Channel, probably the aside from Ghost Hunters, the top two that I think most people would know would be American Chopper and Dirty Jobs. And I found from TVGuide.com that the creator and executive producer of American Chopper was the one directly responsible for Ghost Hunters. So this first season had 10 episodes. It aired weekly. We started October 6th in 2004 and went all the way to December 15th in 2004. We did skip a week in November, interestingly. Okay, so some details about the episodes before we get into the recap. So the episodes are mostly named after the location they go to, such as New Boston Inn or Race Rock Lighthouse. But in the case of only investigating private residences, or if they have multiple investigations, they may instead pick something from the episode to name it after, such as episode 10 being called, quote, The Negative Entity. Across this season, 10 episodes, we observe investigations at 15 locations. So there are 6 private residences, and these are all in the New England area. I think the furthest south they go is Pennsylvania, and I think they may end up in Maine at one point. 6 private residences. We have the Mishler Theater. We have the Railroad Museum in Altoona, Pennsylvania. The Lighthouse Inn, Johnstone Tavern, the Race Rock Lighthouse, Eastern State Penitentiary, the New Bedford Armory, the New Boston Inn, and the Topton House Pub. Our regular investigation team, who I'm considering the people that we're introduced to during the opening sequence in each episode, the people who are actually named in that sequence. Of course, we have Jason and Grant. They are our lead investigators. We have Brian, our case manager, Donna, who is an interviewer, Carl and Keith, who are twins and are demonologists, and then we have Steve, our tech expert. Those are the titles that are given during the intro. I will say, however, we often see Brian and Steve conducting like the field work of the investigation, in addition to the analytical work, in addition to being the case manager and the tech guys. And it seems that when they do the investigation and the analysis, and then they present their findings to Jason and Grant, who help then to interpret it and make ultimate decisions about what those findings mean and how they're going to communicate this to the people that they were called to support. So we do get to see some additional TAPS members throughout the season regularly, which include Andy, Heather, Sherry, another Brian, and Kristen. Each investigation is shared with us as a story with a consistent structure that everything follows. So we get an exposition, we learn about an overview of the case, usually from Brian. This continues as we go to the location and we learn the history of the site, or the experiences that people have had that led to them calling TAPS to come and investigate. I'll note here that TAPS with Jason and Grant, they've had their own experiences, and they talk about this throughout the show, and they've talked about it in interviews. Jason talked about it during that podcast episode I mentioned earlier. What they're trying to do is help people out who have also had experiences, and they cannot figure out how to explain what they witnessed, what they observed, what happened to them. And so TAPS, makes himself kind of a public service team of sorts. You can call them up, you can say, hey, this is what I've had. If they think it's something that's interesting, they'll come and investigate it for you. Their primary prerogative is to actually debunk any chance of the experience and the events being paranormal, which is very, very good investigative practice. It's good science, I will say. There's a lot of critiques of paranormal investigators, ghost hunters in general, and then even more so those that go on television, that, the methods they follow, the techniques and the procedures they do, they're not scientifically rigorous nor sound. They're not following any sort of proper investigative or analytical procedure that would produce results that could be, replicable, verifiable, and stand critique and review from others, both within and outside their field, which I largely agree with. I was trained to be a physical scientist, a chemist specifically, and then I became a social scientist, so I'm very well versed in the scientific methods and how to do good investigative and explorative work on phenomenon. And for the most part, again, I do agree. When I watch paranormal investigation content, ghost hunting content, I'm quite the skeptic, and I'm very much kind of like, well, it could be this. So you haven't really accounted for all the variables in your environment. That noise could be a weird movement of wind through some kind of physical structure, right? However, the TAPS team kind of they do it properly, in my opinion. They're not trying to prove that a spirit, a manifestation, something paranormal is causing an event. Their goal is to see if the event can be replicated using physical means, stuff that is available to humans and them as their investigative team. And if it can, then that means it's likely that the experience could have just been, something of our realm and not a ghost, not something paranormal. Which is the correct way to do it. It's much harder to prove something, especially something that you can't see and is like you only have anecdotal evidence for, than it is to disprove something. So to me, that's the right way to do it. I hold a bit of respect scientifically for Jason and Grant and their approach to their investigations because of that. Other shows, different opinions on. Mr. Bagans and I, although I am a fan of Zach in Ghost Adventures, that show is nowhere near as serious as the TAPS team takes themselves, I believe. Anyway, after the full exposition of the case that they're investigating, we get to watch investigation setup, including any minor drama between the TAPS team members or additional discussion about the investigation logistics, beliefs, and concerns from the TAPS team. This usually just comes in the form of interviews from Jason and Grant in the field. There's not a lot of post-investigation studio interview footage in the show. A lot of the stuff that you're getting as narration, interview, talking head, confessional style stuff is taken in the field. There were only a few scenes where you could tell they've sat someone in front of a green screen or a photography studio backdrop and filmed them talking. And usually when it is that, it's Grant or Jason giving a explanation for how does this device or instrument work? How does this phenomenon that they're observing work? Why are they looking into it? Stuff like that. We'll get scenes of the investigation itself. That's the meat of the show that people love to watch. People also love to meme on. As with any paranormal investigation, specifically ghost hunting. But you'll also see this with Bigfoot hunting. You get a lot of the people in the nighttime filming in night vision mode, and you get did you hear that? What was that? I will note here, paranormal investigations, specifically for suspected or alleged hauntings from a ghost, are very boring. It's sitting in dark places, waiting for something to happen, or trying to catch some phenomena that you can't even observe with the standard human senses. They're doing EVPs because they're well, the ghostly voice, we can't hear it in our range. It's going to be detected as a fluctuation in the electromagnetic field. They're doing temperature readings, stuff like that. I will say the show alleviates the problem of boring camera time by showing most of the times during investigations where something exciting actually does happen. Even if most of these are just the investigation team reacting to noises or reacting to each other. After we watch the investigation happen, we usually get some scenes of the wrap-up, and also this will wrap up any of the TAPS team drama that's going on, or any of their overarching storylines for that episode. We'll get an analysis of what they captured. Usually this is Brian and Steve. Sometimes Andy is there. Analyzing the data. There's a lot of footage of them sitting in the little trailer By the way, the office for the TAPS team is like a trailer in Jason's backyard. One of those like construction trailer offices. The analysis footage is a lot of Brian and Steve sitting in there just sort of looking at the computer monitors and looking at like the audio waveforms and some of the camera footage and being like, oh hey, I think I got something, and it's like, oh, it's an orb, or something that could be a human voice, right? After the analysis, they'll present what they found to Jason and Grant. They'll have a discussion about it, try to figure out like, oh, that's something that could be useful, or that's something that's like, there's something there but we can't explain it, or they'll reflect back on the events of the investigation and be like, no, that particular piece of evidence, we've already discounted that because we think it's, this door is making a weird noise or something. And then sometimes they'll do a follow-up presentation of the findings and what Grant and Jason think about what they found with the people who called them in, or at least someone that can represent them, the people who called them in. I mentioned at the top of the episode that Ghost Hunters is a documentary soap, or a docu-soap style show. So it is a documentary style show. We are following TAPS and the people who are part of that organization. They are paranormal investigators. Our camera crew and production team and filming team is there to follow them as they do ghost hunting. But it also has like soap moments, like soap opera. By which I mean, in addition to the investigations being the main focus of each episode and of the show, they also want to show us a bit of the personal relationships and the interactions and the lives of the members of TAPS. So for this season, we get two kind of overarching plot lines, I guess you could call them. The main one is going to be Jason and Grant's issues dealing with Brian, their case manager, and then Brian having problems with various other team members. Jason and Grant dealing with other team members, like professionalism, newbie status, having to train them, etc. And then also a bit of conflict between how Grant and Jason prefer investigations to happen, how they prefer analysis to go down, and how they talk about what observations were made and what evidence was collected, in contrast to Brian and sometimes Steve's a bit more willingness to jump to claim haunting. Again, Grant and Jason are really out here with the motivation of debunking, and this contrasts heavily with a lot of other paranormal investigators who are trying to prove the existence through their investigation and analysis. Another piece, and this really does help to sell, these are just some people. This is just some people, and this is what they do. The documentary, style format here. Grant and Jason both work for Roto-Rooter. They're plumbers during their day job, and we often get some intercut footage of them, on the job doing plumbing work and discussing the current investigation or future investigations. Whether or not this stuff happens naturally between them as they work together in plumbing is kind of hard to tell. It very much could be something that was kind of added in for the show and said hey, can we film you while you're doing your day job, and while we're there with you, can you talk about ghost hunting? really drive home that this is what you do and this is what you think about a lot. Now, again, I love this show, and I cannot urge people enough to check it out. So I really could go on and on about this show and talk and recap every single episode and give thoughts on every single piece. But that would make this podcast episode probably 4 hours long, if not even longer. So instead, I'm going to recap episode 3 and hopefully very heavily encourage you to check out the rest of the season and the rest of the show. If you like paranormal investigation, if you like spooky vibes, and honestly just entertaining television, check it out. I highly recommend. So episode 3 is titled The Lighthouse Inn. At the start of the episode, of course, we get some recaps about a new member joining the team. That's the second Brian, who is not off on a great start with the team. In the previous episode, he was late, and this upset Jason a lot. Again, Jason is very much about professionalism and reputation, and kind of doing things to a T, and making sure him and his team members are representing the TAPS organization and kind of paranormal investigators as a whole well, and making sure they're seen respectfully. So, and then we get a pre-investigation of the Lighthouse Inn. Our investigation setup, we get to see Brian setting up the technology headquarters. He's the case manager. Steve is told they're the tech guy, but then most of the time in the episodes we actually see Brian being the one setting up the monitors and the computers and a lot of the cameras and devices and such. When you have a small team like this, you kind of just share responsibility and whatnot. There is a extra field researcher in this episode, Kristen. This is Brian Bell's girlfriend. Jason cuts in and gives the information about TAPS. Grant shares, they've had experience, and that's how they do this work. While this show is serialized to an extent, because we get those overarching plot lines between the team members, the editing and the production do a really good job of, if you just picked up any random episode of this show, you would have no problem getting in. If there's anything important that you need to know from previous episodes, they'll re-explain it to you. They'll remind you about where TAPS. We investigate paranormal experiences for people. We want to help people understand the experiences they have and maybe provide them closure or peace about what's going on. Right? You can just jump right in. And another thing I really like about the show, as much as I do like the scenes of the pre-investigation and seeing the kind of relationships between the team members, the show knows you're here for ghost hunting. And it's going to respect your time on that. So they don't spend a lot of time doing other stuff. They get right into the investigation aspect itself. We do get a little bit of a team conflict here. The Brian versus the Brian. Brian Bell has now come in. He's apparently largely been doing kind of background works for the TAPS team up to this point, and now he's being brought on actual investigations more. But as he's coming in, his personality is clashing with the other Brian, who is around more consistently. So Brian H is feeling like his toes are being stepped on and doesn't like this new change up and this guy that's coming in and telling him how to run things. And then, of course, it doesn't help that new Brian is also late all the time, so this is pushing on Jason's buttons. And we get to see later in the episode, Jason has a talk with him about all this stuff, and being hey, this isn't cool, this isn't professional, it's not what we're about. During the investigation itself, we're at an inn, an inn with a kitchen. It's an old style building. I don't quite remember how long it's been around, but of course the owner has called TAPS in to investigate some occurrences that they've noticed and want some explanations for. So during the actual investigation, again, investigations can be really slow and really boring, so they often trim it down to just the highlights. Every now and then they'll leave in some kind of extended sequence of nothingness for us to sit with. While investigating, Grant and one of the staff members of the inn were looking for lights when they heard a bang in the kitchen, like a large pan or a pot being dropped. But when they go to try and recreate the noise, again, to debunk it, if possible, they can't quite get the right heft to the sound with all the stuff that's in there. Making them question of well, what could have caused that? We all heard it, but what was it? There are some tunnels down under maintenance-y, storage-y tunnels down under the inn. Brian, Steve, and Kristen get sent into those tunnels. Grant comes and tells us, teaches us a little bit about paranormal entities and the afterlife and the spirits and how they draw energy from various places. We switch back to Steve, who opts to sit in some really back corner of the tunnels in the dark to see if he can observe anything or have some kind of an experience. We get Keith in this episode, who's one of the demonologists. Keith and Carl are not regular, they're not always there Sometimes we only get one of them. When we get both, it is a treat because they are twins, and I cannot tell them apart until they show the name on screen. They're demonologists. Keith, he is here. He says he felt something. He started recording, and then he tells the audience about what are like the highly active hours for like demonic or spiritual activity, and that's 3 a.m., the witching hour, until dawn. We jump back to the basement group again. Steve does have an experience sitting in that little dark hidey hole by himself. He got touched by something, lasted for a couple seconds. It froze him up. Kind of cut back and forth between a lot of the different groups. They do try to keep it interesting, somewhat to the detriment of actually like understanding the timeline of things. Because after Steve has his experience, and we're sitting with that for a couple minutes, we just kind of cut back to Jason, who is kind of like strolling around, and then cut to Keith again, who is now going into the tunnel after Steve had his experience to investigate, to do some EVP. And then Donna, and they're doing like the wrap up. Donna's here. She mentions, it's super important to not make any conclusions when you're tired just after finishing an investigation. Absolutely good practice there. But then that is immediately cut with Brian H. wrapping up, and he's like, "This place is haunted, yo." It's like, I love the juxtaposition there. Then we get some analysis with Brian and Steve. They thought what they found was an orb. If you don't know, an orb is a circular-shaped like phenomenon that shows up on video and photography that a lot of paranormal investigators will try to use as an evidence of some kind of like manifestation of spiritual energy or ghostly presence. So they thought they caught an orb. I'm a skeptic, but I do like to kind of play along and fall into it and kind of suspend my disbelief and kind of be like, okay, I could see, like, with what they captured, how they're constructing the logic of here's what they saw and here's what they think happened, or they can't explain it, so maybe it is this thing. The orbs, to me, are just so funny. Every time I see an orb, my notes just have in all caps, like, orb! Steve thinks the orb is just dust, and Jason points out that the AC was kicking on and off all night, so that could be blowing things around in the air, disturbing things, and most orbs really are just going to be like light reflecting off of particles in the air in weird ways. Especially since particles tend to be, like, floating particles tend to be spherical. That's how physics works. And so light bouncing off that would make a circular or orb-shaped artifact. The only other thing for the results, we got Kristen measured some temperature readings that happened. The temperature happened to drop at the same time as Steve had his experience of like being touched in that little hidey hole. Within like the paranormal investigation work, temperature fluctuations are one of the big indicators they try to use, both high and low. It's just anytime the temperature, like you have your baseline, and if the temperature changes wildly, that's like a sign that something needs to be looked into, which makes sense. If, for example, you have like a weird crack in a window that's causing a draft, you might expect the temperature to change where the draft is coming in. And so temperature fluctuations are good for both the debunking people and those that are trying to like prove something. Because often they say that like, getting really cold is a sign of a spirit being nearby. That wraps up that first investigation at the Lighthouse Inn. They go back and they present the findings and are like, here's what we found. We don't know if it's, haunted, but here's what we found. We get some mid-episode footage of, again, the day job, so Jason and Grant talking about plumbing and whatnot. This is usually used to, like, transition between investigation scenes. So either two different investigations, or there's sometimes where they've actually gone back for a second investigation of the location, and they'll use the day job to transition between that. It's really good for, like, coming back from the commercial break, or people who have happened to like tune in halfway through the episode. So Jason and Grant talking about a potential investigation, and then we do get a lot of like driving footage as part of the other kind of like slice of life moments of the show. The team in their big vans driving to wherever the investigation is happening. Usually Jason and Grant are in one van, and then everyone else is in another, unless they arrive there separately. On the way there, Jason and Grant talk about hoaxes and setups that they've experienced where clients like fake a haunting. Oh, this is where they go back and they review the results with the inn manager from the Lighthouse Inn. They can't say if it's haunted or not, just inconclusive because they don't have concrete evidence. I will note here, Jason and Grant are like really good at giving the spiel to the clients and remaining professional and kind of, trying to build these kind of like relationships with people. Because even though they're like, hey, we don't know what's going on here, we didn't have the right kind of experiences to be able to tell you it is haunted. We also couldn't really like debunk a lot of stuff. But then Jason will be like, but hey, if you have anything else happen in the future, reach back out to us. Here's my card. And I always found this really cute. They like to gift like the owners or the people who called them a hat with the TAPS like branded acronym on it. I really want to get one of those hats. I might just get one because I think you can buy them on their website. So the second location is the Johnstone Tavern. On the drive to that location, again, we get some slice of life. This is our soap element. Jason and Grant discuss the tension between the two Brians. At the tavern, they meet with the owner, Matt, who explains that he's had some experiences where he's heard things, and they talk to manager Teresa, who tells them that they've had trouble keeping staff on due to, quote, excitement and activity. The Johnstone Tavern's namesake comes from John Stone, who we learn killed a man over a game of poker on the property. This site also happens to apparently be a location significant to the Underground Railroad, and there's also allegedly a room where a little girl who was hit by a train was taken to, where she then died. And this is one of the like major experiences that people who have been at the tavern have said they've had, as they've seen a little girl running around during the pre-investigation, or things they have rumors they've heard that the little girl's clothes are still potentially on the property, which is important to the team because, again, in like the paranormal investigative like belief and kind of like how does this stuff like happen, artifacts like that can still have like the spirits attached to them, kind of like the whole like unfinished business kind of thing. Brian goes and gets the dress from the attic. I can't tell if it like hadn't been moved ever since, and Brian is like the first person to disturb it, or at least in a long time. But he goes to get the dress because he wants to put a camera just like directly on it to see if anything happens with it, which, it makes sense. During the investigation, we get some temperature fluctuations in the attic. Donna and Kristen have like an overwhelming like sensation type experience, or they're just kind of like feel something's off, something's weird. Particularly like they both had the feeling like in the restroom. Brian has a similar sense of a presence while he's up in the attic. Keith finds a interesting portrait of a child. I'm not sure which child, but a portrait of a child. He decides to say a prayer over it. Jason's like, yeah, it's a creepy portrait, but that's just a painting. Although Jason does take a moment to say, like, he's feeling something is, like, atypical, out of the normal here. And he even goes so far to say that he thinks something could be here, but he would hate to not have the evidence. During the analysis, Brian and Steve pick up on a voice on EVP, but they're not quite sure what it says. We have some more orbs. They find a weird light behavior that happened around the same time as one of the EVPs that was picked up. EVPs are like the ghost voices. They record, they ask the questions. So you see the ghost hunters doing like the, is anyone here? Make a noise or say something if you're here with us, and they can't hear it. They do the recording and listen back to it because then you can hear like the response on the recording. Because of the timing of the light event and the EVP, the team actually wants to go back to try to recreate the light event. Which this is like what you're supposed to do scientifically when you're doing an investigation. This is good work here. You have something that you don't quite understand, so you want to see if you can reproduce it. That's what like science is all about. So they go back, they do some tests, and they find potentially that what this light entity was that they couldn't figure out was actually one of the recording lights from one of the crew cameras. Brian doesn't agree. He wants everything to be haunted. But because of that, and they could sort of like partially recreate it, they're like, we're not going to, use that as an example of like a haunting. We have to kind of like pseudo debunk that and say that it could have just been because of the people who were there. The owner is like, curious about the EVP evidence, though. Jason talks to the owner and says, he'd really like to come back and do a longer investigation, which I will just say is one of my major critiques of the paranormal investigator ghost hunting profession. A lot of people you see, like, on TV, on YouTube, elsewhere, they always, like, investigate places, like, once. It's hard to find, like, a team that has done, like, okay, we're going to go investigate this place, and we're going to go investigate it, like, every day over a series of weeks, or we're going to come back once a month and look at this place and do, like, a continued and sustained investigation. There's a lot of just, like, let's look at a place once, let's see if we have any experiences, and if we do or don't, that's it. Which, always irked me. I'm always like, if you want to really prove, for the teams specifically that are out there trying to prove that ghosts exist and that you can interact with them, if you're trying to prove it, then wouldn't you want to be at these allegedly haunted locations as much as possible to try to maximize your likelihood of having an experience and then also capturing it? So the fact that Jason's like, I'd like to come do another investigation when that's, more thorough and extended is like an A+ for me. One of the overarching kind of plot points among the TAPS members and like their personal life is Jason and Grant get a lot of flack from their families, particularly their wives, about spending so much time and money into the paranormal investigation. They do a lot of this like overnights and on weekends, and if they have to like drive somewhere, they're on like Rhode Island, I think. So if they have to drive to like Pennsylvania, that's quite a bit of a drive, quite a bit of a journey, and and they're paying for everything like themselves. And I bring this up because at the end of this episode, during kind of like the ultimate wrap up, Jason is telling the audience like, okay, this investigation, the Johnstone Tavern, like this was worth like missing a day of work. And he also makes a comment that's like, well, at least the late night work doesn't take them away from their families too much. Wild that they like missed a whole day of work to do this. 2004 was a different time. So that's, one episode. You kind of get the good vibe, an understanding of a lot of the episodes, like they play out like that. Like I said, there's a good structure to this show that is very consistent. I will just kind of note some highlights of the season, some of my favorite moments or some standout moments. There's not a ton. Again, a lot of the investigative work is kind of the same across episodes. They do EVPs, they do temperature readings, maybe someone has an experience. The really cool stuff is when they find something that they can't like figure out how to explain. There's an episode where they're investigating like an old lighthouse for the military. I'll get into that in a moment. And a lot of things are kind of able to explain. There's like weird noises, the building's really old. But then at the very like near end of the investigation, they catch like a chair that gets moved on its own. And partially because of the camera quality, they can't tell if there's anything like moving it. But that's like their highlight of the episode is like, look, this chair got knocked around. But in Bevan, they're investigating an armory, and one of the camera guys like has an experience. He gets like completely knocked on his back and is like out of commission for it. We spend like 5 minutes focusing on this guy like getting knocked over and then him getting like seen to and taken care of, and then like later in the episode they follow up with it, and then in the next episode they even follow up further with it because Jason or Grant takes the opportunity to sit down with that crew member and kind of talk about like, well, tell us what you felt, what did you experience. So So that's interesting. It was interesting. Who knows if it was set up? It seemed like the camera guy really did have something like weird happen to him, because he just like falls backwards, and it's on camera, multiple cameras, and they all witnessed it. And it's not like he was like unbalanced. This guy like knows what he's doing. This is episode 7, and you can kind of tell they did air the episodes in the sequence they were filmed, because again, there's a lot of like referencing back to previous events and even previous investigations. So this camera guy, would have known what he's doing and know how to do this. So he's not just going to, like, get off balance randomly because of all the equipment he has on. So that was one of the, like, standout moments. In episode 10, they're doing a personal investigation for a family up in New York. A woman that's had a series of physical experiences. Client Linda says that she's sensitive to spirits, and she feels like that one of the spirits that may be there is like a bad ghost. It's like Linda and like her friend Dawn, whatnot. There's one point where they're like sitting in silence in the living room of this house, trying to like see if anything happens. And it's all the like investigative stuff is filmed like in night vision mode for the cameras, so it's just all like that grainy green, which adds to the spookiness. But it's like there's nothing happening, and then suddenly it's Linda and her aunt. We like pan over to Linda, who's sitting cross-legged in like a big lounge chair, or a big armchair. And she like looks directly at the camera almost, and she just goes, "He's here." Which is, I'm sorry, it's one of the funniest like framings and scenes in the entire show. It feels like very on the nose, but it kind of just spontaneously happened. Other than that, the other major thing that I'll point out is it's 2004. We are kind of in the peak of, like, I don't want to say propaganda, but like media that loves to highlight the imperialism and the power of the U.S. military. You got to think about, like, okay, this is a ghost hunting show made in 2004. What's the context of 2004, though? What's going on in the context of any show, really, that could be like influencing it, and its choices for what to show and how to edit and how to produce. We get 2 different instances of the military requesting TAPS investigate something for them. The lighthouse I mentioned previously, that was like the Coast Guard. They're like, hey, we have to like maintain this lighthouse, and our guys don't want to go out to it because it has like rumors of being haunted. Could you guys come and investigate it and maybe hopefully prove that it's not haunted so our guys can do their job? But during that episode, like at the end when they're wrapping up, and it's like the entire episode they make a point to talk about like how rough the water is around the base of the lighthouse. It's like on an island, and like that there's a bunch of rocks at the bottom that are like really like dangerous. You could like easily crash up a boat on there or hit some hidden rocks and capsize and whatnot. And I kid you not, at the end of the episode, when they're wrapping up and they're getting ready to go into the boat to get back to the mainland, they find like another a flare gets sent up or something off to the side, and like the Coast Guard that's there like springs into action, and they end up rescuing these 2 guys on a boat who, like, their boat had lost power, they had been drifting, and that was like their last flare. And it was like, wow, what a cool moment. Look how cool the Coast Guard is. And then the same thing happens in the Armory episode with the crew member that had an experience and got attacked and fell over. They're in an armory that's run by the military. And so, like, who comes to help the crew member? The guys that are working at the armory that are part of the military. National Guard. National Guard runs the armory. New Bedford. We get another good moment of like, wow, the military is here to save the day and help out. I just now noticed in my notes while I was scrolling back to find which branch was running the armory, that in episode 7, there was this, after this event happened, there's a speech from Grant, and he's like, what must happen to a normal person to make them spend this much time and money like investigating the paranormal and pursuing this type of work? And this is placed over footage of like Jason just like sitting into the dark. Cinema. Perfect. So how was the show received after it started airing? It was mentioned in the podcast episode with Jason that this show actually pushed the Sci-Fi Channel Wednesday night slot from around 60th to the number 1 spot. And this show is really the one that popularized like the paranormal investigation show genre. We'd had shows that focused on like the paranormal and like unexplainable events before, but this is the one that really took like paranormal investigators, let's just follow them and make a show out of it. So particularly like paranormal investigation, like going along with the team, became popular because of the show. We ended up with Ghost Hunters International, Ghost Hunters Academy, Celebrity Paranormal Project, Ghost Adventures, all sorts of shows. Demi Lovato and Kesha both had ghost hunting like mini series at one point. You can find plenty of people online who do not only the ghost hunting, but also like the debunking of footage from paranormal investigation. And it's spun off into so many things. It's been, parodied a ton. This type of format like really became like a piece of pop culture, largely in part started because of this show. My thoughts? I have a ton of thoughts. Of course I do. With a show like this that I love and I has like a personal connection to, I have a ton of thoughts. First, I just think it's tons of fun to watch. Again, I do have a special appreciation because I watched it so much growing up. But the personalities, they're engaging, they're entertaining, and I personally get a kick out of how the editing team puts footage together. And I haven't mentioned it at all, but maybe you've heard some spooky noises in the background of this episode. I tried my best to see if I could edit this episode the same way that they edit a Ghost Hunters episode, so I've added a bunch of spooky sound effects the same way they do all throughout this one. I had fun with that. I will say paranormal shows are kind of difficult to discuss properly because they're pitfalls for people who don't understand reality show production or anyone who wants to believe that everything they're seeing on a program is actually real, right? That's kind of the fallacy of reality TV. We say this is like unscripted, but for a lot of shows, there's a lot of production that goes in. They even have like quote unquote writers or story producers on their teams who are looking at what's happening with the crew members and the cast and going, oh, we can make an entertaining and engaging plot line out of these things. Let's try to like push them towards that, to give us more footage of it. But so even if you don't believe in the supernatural, the show can be edited and made in a way to at least make the investigators seem like really trustworthy. And interestingly, I think we end up with, critiques of the show where they'll be like, oh, Ghost Hunters XYZ, blah, 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 I didn't like it, or I did like it, or whatever. Critiques of the show that are actually critiques of the entire, like, subgenre of paranormal investigation shows, and critiques of the entire activity of paranormal investigation. I bring that up because some of the reviews of the show, they'll be particularly harsh on Taps, on Jason and Grant and the team, when in reality, these reviewers, their ire is actually directed more, again, at the entire concept of paranormal investigation. It just so happens that this was the first and the most prominent show for a while that they could direct that at. It's hard to complain about an entire, like, group of people. It's much easier to complain about a, like, specific instance of something that you don't like or you don't agree with. This kind of show is really good at like exposing a particular group of people to the viewing public, which is what I think, like, again, documentaries do that really well, but I think reality TV also does that really, really well, sometimes for good, sometimes for evil. They can find just like a population of people that you've probably never really thought of, and put their experiences into a entertaining and engaging and easily digestible format, and now you've learned about this population of people, in this case paranormal investigators. This can of course be taken to an evil and exploitative end. Case in point, a show like Hoarders or 600 Pound Life, or like Teen Mom, where it's like, maybe you don't spend a lot of time thinking about teenage pregnancy, but here's a show about it. Maybe you don't spend a lot of time thinking about paranormal investigators. Here's a show about paranormal investigators, right? That to me is like a staple of like the reality TV world, is like shows about people that you didn't think about before. And now you're watching all about them. I will say, if done properly, that kind of show can also really serve to lend credibility and validity to these kind of groups. Something I like to think about constantly on this show, and a question I ask as kind of the basis of like my research and how I analyze these shows, is what does the show do for the people who made it and the people who are in it? So for the TAPS team, particularly as how they were portrayed in this show, again, professional and reputable, it really goes a long way to give them credibility. And this credibility can also then extend to other members of TAPS, because it's kind of an overarching New England and Atlantic organization that a bunch of different investigative teams are part of, and also extend to other paranormal investigators and ghost hunters outside of TAPS. There was one episode they're doing an investigation with another TAPS member who's not part of the core group that is being filmed every episode. And Jason makes a point multiple times to explain to us that this guy's method of investigation is more of the proving style. And so that he often, when he captures things, he's looking to find something odd in his photography, his footage, his recordings, and his data that would like show the evidence of something paranormal. He's kind of making the epistemological like jump, or the ontological leap that like, oh, here's this thing, it has to be paranormal, like skipping past any other kind of debunked non-paranormal explanation. And so, you know, in doing that and being able to like explain that and show how they do their work, this kind of show really does lend like credibility and reliability to these people and their techniques. I will say, it is ironic that this show debuted on the Sci-Fi channel. Almost as if they knew that it's like, hey, we're going to put this cool ghost hunting show on here. We don't think it's real. It's on the science fiction channel. I do also like that the show will include like absolute failure on part of the TAPS team. Like the Mishler Theater investigation, they just got like nothing out of. And any times that they'll be like, hey, here's our methods, and if they have a moment where like a team member deviates from the expected methods, they'll be like, great, now we can't use that data you collected because like it wasn't done properly. So it's useful to like show that these teams aren't always successful. I think if you had a paranormal investigation team that was always having experiences and always showing that ghosts are real and always having stuff that they can't debunk, you'd start to question it after a while. You know, and then it becomes, how many instances do you have to be shown before you start questioning the validity of what they're doing and the, quote, reality of the program that you're watching. The recaps are interesting. We also get a lot of like next time on ghost hunters at the end of the episodes. I think those are interesting pieces to have as part of the episode. Clearly this means they wanted to take some kind of like serialized stance on the show, but again, they do have to grapple with like people joining in each week for the first time. I do think they managed to get a balance there really well. They managed to set up their show in a way that if it's your first time watching it, even if it's like episode 8 or whatever, you can quickly get caught up, you know what's going on. They sprinkle in the like interpersonal relationships and interactions and any of that drama and story, but not so much that it's like distracting. You're here for ghost hunting. They respect that. I will say, from what I know from later seasons, these elements slowly get like phased out. I think by season 4 or season 6, it really is just like, here's an investigation, here's an investigation, here's another investigation, and they don't have much stuff about the team members and their like personal lives in there. Like in one episode after the investigations, I guess maybe to like fill time, we went to a whole like cookout with the team. We got like 5 or 10 minutes of just like the team members hanging out footage. I will state all of the editing for the show is clearly done with intention. You know, here we have the addition of like the suspenseful music effects and the stings and whatnot to sell like the scary aspect of the focus. But also I think it's important to note that the, you know, personal life elements were included to help show the everyman characterization of the team members, particularly of Jason and Grant. And the show will also leave in a lot of the logic and the discussion and the arguments that happen during investigations and the analyses. Most of the places that they investigate really led to just inconclusive findings. They couldn't really say either way, or nothing substantial, just because of how thorough the team is with their analysis. Again, or, they caught something, but then the data collection method wasn't sound. So we can't use that data, we can't use that experience. And they mention a lot, of course, you can have a sensation, you can have an anecdotal thing, but if you can't capture it and you can't show it to someone else so they can have a facsimile of the same experience, then it's worthless. You can't just go off of, I had a feeling and a bad vibe, and use that to be there's something here. Some people just have those every day. It's called anxiety. So the team, they really only make claims that they can back up. And it's good that we get to see them explain and do this. Two last things I'll hit on. If things were faked during the investigations of this season, I don't think it was very easy to tell. A few of the cast members of TAPS, have come out in the future in reference to this season, in the past reference to when this episode is being recorded, to talk about maybe some things were faked by crew members, but a good amount of them, particularly Jason and Grant, I believe, have also said that no, they don't think anything was ever manipulated by anyone who was making the show. And the other piece here, I'll say, is shows like this are also really good for the visited locations. Again, I like to ask a lot, what does a reality show do for the people who made it and the people who are in it? When you have a show like this, you have a third sort of character here. You have the actual location. A haunted house is a character. And so this show is really good for kind of publicity, especially if the place being investigated is a historical or cultural landmark that can make money from being known as a haunted attraction. And of course, that being said, while it was important for the TAPS team to show that they investigate places out of their own interest, they also will investigate places to help people who are having experiences. We did, again, have 6 investigations that were just at someone's house because they were having trouble with experiences where they were living and they wanted help figuring out what was going on. There was one location where you could tell the person who had called TAPS in, it was a restaurant or another pub inn type thing, they really wanted it to be haunted. She even at the end of the episode gives us, I think, a quick interview bit where she's I was really hoping it'd be haunted. You could tell that she wanted to kind of play that up for her business, and it just didn't pan out for her. We did, of course, Jason and Grant at one point talk about hoaxes and people faking hauntings for them. I don't think we didn't see any of that this season, but it was interesting they brought it up. I don't know if the show would ever air a faked haunting. I'm trying to remember from what I've watched if that ever happened. I feel just sort of out of respect, maybe they just wouldn't do it. Although who knows, it again would also make for some excellent stakes and tension. That was season 1 of Ghost Hunters. Kind of very quickly, definitely go watch it. I cannot suggest this show enough just because it's one of my favorites. So if you're into the paranormal stuff, even if you don't quite believe in it, but you'd like people hearing and seeing people talk about it and do the investigations, check it out. It's a long-running show. It has many iterations. And season 1 was really a good, nice, fun intro to it. But what do you think? Are you as much of a fan of this show as I am? Do you think Paranormal Investigation has a place in reality television or TV at all? Should it be shown? Is this an interesting group of people to follow? I think so, especially in the way they're portrayed here. Thanks for listening. This has been the recap episode. You can follow me to see what I'm watching next, see what I'm currently working on, and to get updates about the show on Instagram at the recap episode. All of these episodes are also uploaded to YouTube at the channel The Recap Episode Pod. Until next time, I'm going to go conduct some EVPs and see if I can figure out the source of the spooky noise that's been haunting me the entire time of this recording.